Man, I have a hard time sometimes singing that, take all my pride and my possessions. I'm like, can I keep a little bit, right? Just a little bit. So I heard a definition of pride that I had to share because it so busted me, and I want you guys to be in my... So, do we have pride? We have, some of us have open pride, some of us know we have hidden pride, which is, I had it really good, but I'm a really prideful person. That's my group. But if you're struggling with whether you know if you have pride or not, I heard a great definition. So have you ever been in a group photo, and you take a look at the photo, and you look at yourself and say, that's a great picture? You ever done that? That's pride. I don't care how everybody looks. I look good. Let's go with this one, right? So join my club, all right? All right, so we're in Mark 8 today. Justin from Campus Crusade for Christ last week did a great job of taking us through Jesus' interaction with two Gentiles and healing them and seeing how that applies to our life. And then Jesus leaves the individuals and goes back to the crowds. And so we're going to pick up in verse 1 of Mark 8. And I've never relied on a title before, but we're covering so much ground today. We're actually going to cover, hopefully, prayerfully, the whole chapter. And it seems like it's all over the place. I was like, Lord, help me to focus in. And what does this really mean? And so I got a lesson for myself that hopefully you guys can take a little bit with, because with Best Prayer, you kind of see that it's been a crazy week. And at about Thursday, it's like tap out kind of thing. And I was like, Lord, I just need to know, like, how is this all kind of come together? And he really came down to two things, and it's in your title today. It boils down to, are we going to follow our plan, or are we going to follow God's plan? And he just asked me, hey, are you going to go with your plan, or are you going to just chill and rest and be at peace and walk out my plan? And man, I'm getting a little bit older and a little bit wiser, so I was like, I like your plan, right? But it's so easy for us to take hold of our plan and say, I want it to go this way, and it doesn't go that way, and then I've got a choice of either I'm going to force it, or I'm going to get mad, or I'm going to go blow a cork somewhere, or I need to go be alone with God and go, okay, it's not going according to my plan. What's your plan? And so today, all the scenarios, all the stories that are going to be encompassed in chapter 8 boil down to us or the people in the story seeking after God's plan or seeking after our plan. So hopefully that'll help you zero in as we cover a lot of ground this morning. So listen fast, all right? Jesus has already fed the 5,000. And now that was in the Jewish region, right? And now he's in the Gentile region. So it kind of picks up from last week of Jesus is encountering with two Gentile people. Why? Because they're in a Gentile region. So now he's going to encounter a mass of people, 4,000 men, plus women and children. And that's going to be in a Gentile region. So that's where we're going to pick up in verse 1 of Mark 8. All right? In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, they had nothing to eat. And he called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from very far away. And his disciples answered him, how can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these are also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied, and they took up broken pieces left over, 7 basketfuls. And there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples, and he went to the district of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. All right, so we're going to pause there and set the stage, right? So he's fed the crowd of 5,000. He asked the disciples, how are we going to do this? And they went right back to the old style, right? We're out in the middle of nowhere. We've got no bread. There's no way we're going to be able to feed these crowds. And so he's like, bring me what you got. Just like with the 5,000, right? They're not picking up on it. And he does exactly what he did with the 5,000, this time with a Gentile crowd, opening the door to what he's going to be doing after the cross with the Gentile nations. And he brings them into the story. He brings them into what he's doing. And then he gets in the boat and he immediately leaves them. And he gets to the shore, and who reaches him on the shore? The religious guys are back. And they demand, all right, now they're aggressively pursuing Jesus. They're aggressively challenging Jesus. And after he left them stinging from Mark 7, they come to him and they say, okay, we need a sign from heaven. Now, why did they ask for a sign from heaven? Because they had been seeing signs from earth. They saw him feed the 5,000. They heard about the 4,000 probably because the crowds are following. They're seeing him heal the blind, heal the sick, heal the lame, heal the deaf, heal the mute, heal the demon-possessed. He's done all that. But then they're going to going, okay, well, that's earthly miracles. Give us a spiritual sign from heaven. And Jesus' response is that he sighed deeply, which is one of those groans, right? He's just beside himself with these guys. And it probably flashes back to his encounter in the wilderness with the enemy. And what's the enemy saying? Hey, do these things and prove yourself, and everybody's going to believe. Fast forward it to your kingdom and skip the middle part. And Jesus could have called a legion of angels. He could have called the sun to stand still. He could have called darkness to fall. He could have called all these heavenly signs. But he stopped there and probably said in his brain, thou shalt not put the Lord your God to a test. And he departed him. He just walked away. So our plan asks for a sign to give us faith. And God's plan demands faith before the sign. Right? God, just do this, and I'll believe. Jesus, just do a heavenly sign, and we'll believe. No, they wouldn't have. Jesus knew their heart. And so we demand a sign to have faith, and God goes, no, my plan is that you have faith before the sign, that you step out in faith, or you trust in faith, or you rest in faith before you see what you're praying for come to fruition. My plan, show me. His plan, trust me. All right, let's keep going. Verse 14. Now they've forgotten to bring bread, the disciples, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. All right, now this isn't a big, gigantic loaf. This is actually a personal loaf. This is one of the you stick in your back pocket for the rest of the day, okay? So they got one little bun between the crowd. Verse 15, he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you take up? And they said, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of bread, broken pieces, did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? That's not a rhetorical question. Don't you guys get this? And the answer is no, they're not getting it yet. But he didn't kick him out of the boat. He's like, swim to shore, right? No, he's like, okay, you don't get this yet. But he asked them, are your hearts hardened? Like, is there something that's preventing you from getting this? Because he's warning them against something that they have no clue about. He says the yeast of the Pharisees, or the leaven of the Pharisees, depending on your translation, and of Herod. So we got to kind of break that down real quick and say, what's he talking about? Well, we know kind of the MO of the Pharisees. Their thing is religion. Their thing is the law. Their thing is being set apart by coming up with all these rules and all these regulations and all this religion so that they could look good in their eyes or in the other people's eyes. And yet Jesus called it leaven. So why would he call it leaven or yeast? Because in that term, they looked at leaven as sin. When Passover came, God said, get all the leaven out of your house. It's a representation of sin. Get your house cleaned up, get it in order, and get ready for the Exodus. And then every year they were supposed to observe the Passover to remind themselves of God's deliverance from Egypt, and also that they needed to continually be on top of purging their household, purging their individual lives of sin. And so Jesus is referring to the sin of the Pharisees and the sin of Herod. All right, so we know the false doctrine and the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. That's pretty easy. But what about Herod. Herod's a king, and he had these followers of the Jewish faith called Herodians. And what they did is they basically sold out to the government. And they're like, if we can ally ourselves with Herod, if we can kind of modify our religion to come under his leadership, maybe he'll elevate us up, and maybe we'll get a seat at the table, and we can rule and reign from Herod's table, our religion, and make it all fit together. The problem with that is they had to sell out a lot of their faith in order to sit at Herod's table. And so Jesus is saying, it's not just the leaven of the Pharisees you have to watch out for, it's the people that have sold out to the government. Sold out to something else other than faith in me alone. And so you got to be aware of that. And instead of them going, oh yeah, they're like, we got no bread. He's mad at us. Dude, you were supposed to get the bread. And Jesus is like, do you not get this? Are your hearts hardened? And then he takes them back. Didn't you see me do this? I fed 5,000 plus, and you took up 12 baskets. I fed 4,000 plus, you took up 7 baskets. Why are you worried about bread? If you've got a scrap of bread, we got enough, right? And I'm sure we can just reach over the side and grab some fish, and we got enough for that too. Why are you so stuck on the physical? So our plan is what? We look at what we got physically. I look at my possessions, and I determine how good things are. But God says, I got to get your eyes off the physical, because my plan is that you look beyond the physical to the spiritual. That one's hard to do. So my plan looks at what's physical, and God's like, I want you to get your eyes off the physical and look beyond to the spiritual. And God's serious about this because it says that Jesus then rebuked them. He's like upset with them. You guys should be further along in this walk. But you're not there yet. You have no perception, no understanding. You have hard hearts. You have blind eyes. You have deaf ears. But I still love you, and we're going to stay in this boat until it comes together. Verse 22. They're in the boat. They get to the other side. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out to the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Jesus laid his hands on the eyes again, and he opened his eyes, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. All right, now Jesus had actually really judged Bethsaida for the things that he was doing, and they just had unbelief. They had unbelief, they had no belief. And so he's outside of the city when he brings this man. All right, again, this is not a circus show. This is not an act. Jesus has come across a blind guy, and he's like, come with me outside of the city. And just like last week, there's spit involved. We're like, could have saved that one. But unlike last week, this miracle is progressive. This miracle is gradual. He spits on the guy's eyes. He's like, do you see anything? And obviously this guy had once seen before, because he's like, I see men, but they look like trees. So I kind of see, but everything's vague. Everything's not kind of panning out. So Jesus touches him again, and then he sees well. His sight is restored. He sees everything clearly. And Jesus says, don't go to the city. I brought you out of the city. Go home. All right, where's God's plan in this? Well, my plan is, Jesus, touch me once, right? I want it fixed now. I want the immediate sight. I don't want to go through this. I see a little bit, I see a little bit, I see a little bit. But sometimes, and many times, I can't say every time, because God does the instant every once in a while. We're like, thank you, Jesus. Can we do that more often, right? But many times in our lives and many times in our walk, it's a progressive encounter. It's a progressive invasion of Jesus in our lives that comes gradually and progressively, that requires multiple touches to accomplish what his plan is. So our plan is, I want it immediately done, and God's plan is, this is going to be a journey and a process many times. Faith this out, walk this out. Now, in that, there's always still good news. Because if you're in this journey and you're like, he didn't do it for me this immediate way, and I've heard him do that for other people, so he must not be in my journey. He must not be in my progression. Don't let that sink in. Jesus is in the journey. And many times he's in the journey even when we don't see him in the journey. Whether it's God's revelation about a situation or whether it's a healing process. Take note from the disciples, right? Were they getting it? No. Could Jesus have flipped the light switch on and go, illuminate, discern, get it? Yes. But he chose not to. He chose to do it the hard way in relationship, to say, I know you're not getting yet. Your hearts are hardened. You're not there. But we're going to continue this process just like this healing illustrates. So don't get too stuck on the, he didn't do it immediately. And just have faith that in the journey and in the process, he's doing great things. Because that's many times his plan. Verse 27. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they told him, well, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others say one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter always jumps in there, right? And Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. All right. So he's going to Caesarea Philippi. It's like 20 miles north, so they're on a pretty good journey. It's going to take them a while to get up there. And on the way, for the spark of conversation, he just throws it out there. Hey, what are you guys hearing? Who do people say that I am? Now, we'd already heard what Herod said he was, right? Herod said he's got to be John the Baptist resurrected because he's doing miracles and he's back to haunt me. And so the first thing out of their mouth is, well, a lot of people are saying you're John the Baptist resurrected. Other people say you're Elijah, because Elijah didn't die. He was carried up in the chariots of fire to heaven, and so maybe God just sent him back because he hasn't died yet. And other people are like, well, maybe he's just one of the prophets, because there's a lot of prophecy about the coming of the Messiah, and maybe God chose one of those guys to come back to prepare the way or to be the guy. But Peter's like, no, you guys got it all wrong, because he is the Messiah. That's what Christ means. He is the anointed one. He is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. That Christ is the title of all the names for the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament. And we look at that and we're like, man, he finally got it. It finally sunk in. He finally has connected the dots all the way back, that it's not one of the prophets. It's not one of the big guns like Elijah. It's not even John the Baptist. Jesus has come. He is the Son of God. He is the King of Kings. He is the Messiah. He's the anointed one. And Jesus doesn't go, you missed it. Another gospel, he's like, man, you got that straight from the heaven. You got that straight from God. Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father in heaven has given you that insight. Touchdown for Peter. And then Jesus goes, okay, we got this. Don't tell anybody. What? Why does every time something really, really cool happens, you're like, don't tell anybody? He's like, it's not time for that. But right here in this part of Mark is a huge turning point to where Mark takes us in the gospel, because where Jesus takes the disciples in the gospel. Don't tell anybody that I'm the Christ. Why? Because everybody's got to figure out this as revealed from our Father in heaven. So the question this morning is, where are we at in this? What about you? What about me? Where do we stand on who does Jesus to you? What do you say about who Jesus is? Because these guys said he's the anointed one, he's the Christ, he's the Messiah, and Jesus is like, yes, don't tell anybody. And we've all got to come to that place in our walk with him to say, man, who is Jesus? Because the world's still saying the same thing, right? Oh, he's a good guy. He might be one of the prophets. He's a great teacher. He's a good model for my kids. Not so much for me, but for my kids, I really want them to get that character stuff in their lives. Who is Jesus? And regardless of where you fall in this, know that we've all walked through this process, right? And some it was an immediate, wow, Jesus says that, I'm in. And many of us took time for our eyes to be opened and our ears to be opened to find out the truth of who Jesus is, that we could come to a place to say, I believe Jesus is exactly who he said he is. I believe he's the Messiah. He's the Son of God. And that's the most important question we can answer while we walk the earth. So we've all got friends, we've got family that haven't answered that question yet. They're kicking around what the world says, right? They haven't really gotten alone. They haven't really studied his word to say, who do I say that Jesus is? And so many of our plans question that Jesus is the only way. Like, dude, that's a hard statement. I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm saying many of our plans say that. There's got to be more than one way. That just seems so limited. So our plan kind of comes up with alternate routes to the Father. And the world's plan says, dude, don't worry about it. There is no perfect way to the Father. You can get there however you choose to get there. Whether you choose this religion or just your self-enlightenment or whatever that looks like for you, you'll be good. You'll all get there. We'll all get there. It's all good. Our plan questions that Jesus is the only way, but God's plan says and demands that we come to the Father through only the way of Jesus. And we sang about it this morning. Jesus is the way. He is the truth. He is the life. Why? Because he said he was. And he said no one can come to the Father except through me, by me. What's the difference? Well, through me is he's the access. He's the door to get to the Father. But by me is the way that it's accomplished. That he is now setting his sights on Jerusalem because he knows what's in store for him. And no one else in history has ever died for mankind, much less raised themselves from the dead for mankind. And so that's why Father says he is the only way, because he's the only one that claimed it, died it, and then relived it in the power of his own resurrection. But we always come back to this and like, oh, but there's got to be another way in our plan. And at the end of the day, we have to surrender it and say, God's plan says that Jesus is the only way. Once that revelation hits, are we good? It's done? Yeah, we're sealed and we're good to go in heaven. But where did Peter go after the revelation, right? And we do many Peters. So Jesus confirms that Peter's on the right track. Yes, I am the Messiah. Tell no one. And then he goes into, we got to go to Jerusalem because I have to suffer. I have to be mocked. I have to be crucified. I have to die. But I will rise again on the third day. And Peter loses it. Completely loses it. He rebukes Jesus. Now, this is the term that they use when Jesus rebukes the demons to flee. Now, Peter's rebuking Jesus in the same way. Why did he do that? Because he could not fathom that his Messiah, that he just called out, that you are the Messiah, you are the Christ, you are the Son of the living God, is going to die. That does not compute in their religion, in their philosophy, in their following. He's like, Jesus, you should be getting a crown right now. Not talking about dying. If you die, the religious leaders are going to be like, see, told you. You cannot die and fulfill the purposes of the Father in being the Messiah. And what's Jesus' response? Dude, get behind me. That is not the Father's plan. The Father's plan is that I do suffer and die. Because you missed the last part. Because you started thinking before you were listening. I'm going to raise myself from the dead. 3 days. Did he get it? No. Do we get it? Not in this plan. There's got to be other ways. I thought about it. In another verse, or another gospel, what's Jesus call Peter? He calls him the rock, right? Man, that gospel proclamation of I am the Christ, I am the Messiah, I'm going to build my church on that rock, that testimony. Peter went from the rock to the stumbling block in like split second. He went from the proclamation to does not compute, and he has to jump in and say that cannot be God's plan. Why? Because they wanted that immediate gratification. They wanted the immediate fix, not the process. And Jesus is like, God's process involves me suffering and dying and raising myself from the dead before this kingdom part works itself out. It's going to be a process. It's going to be like over 2,000 years. Peter would be like, no way. We ain't got time for that. But Jesus doesn't just address Peter. It says he turns to all the disciples. Why? Because they're all in the same boat. James and John are fighting about who's going to be on his right hand and who's going to be on his left hand. They're all thinking about a physical kingdom, right? My plan, focus on the physical. God's plan, it's way beyond the physical. It's more than you can ask or imagine. So you've got to get into my plan for all this to make sense. So he looks to all of them and he's like, I realize that you want the immediate fix, but the process involves suffering. And not just suffering for me. All of us are going to suffer. Because only in the suffering are we going to be transformed into the glory of God, into all that he's got in this plan. So my plan, like Peter's plan, I'm going to tell you the plan. I'm going to tell you the way you should go. And it does not involve suffering. That's crazy. It involves immediate kingship, immediate crown, immediate we're in your court, immediate we're all good here, Rome's out, Israel's in. That's a good plan, right, Jesus? And Jesus is like, no, that's not the plan. Because God's plan demands that we follow Jesus even when it doesn't match up with our plan. And it usually includes suffering. Don't we know it? But God goes, you got to trust me in this. Because your plan is short-sighted. Your plan is a kingdom that's going to physically fail one day. My plan is beyond the physical to the supernatural. A kingdom that's never going to perish, never going to spoil, never going to fade, never going to wear out, never going to go away, never going to be challenged. My plan is eternal. So don't try to get Jesus to do it your way. Do it my way through my son Jesus. And then you'll be in sync with my plan. But if you try to do it your way, guess what? You're going to be on the back end of that. You're going to find rebuking, challenging, discipline, all those fun things that we get to go through when we demand our plan to go the way we think God should take it. But God goes, no, I'm calling you disciples because disciples are followers and trained ones to follow my son in the plan that I have for you individually. That plan we heard this morning that was determined before the foundation of the world. Look at verse 34. So he was dealing with the disciples, not just Peter, calling them all out, and now he calls the crowd to himself. Calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he says to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his own soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in glory of the Father with the holy angels. And he said to them, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. And so Jesus is like, okay, it's time for the teaching moment, right? He's had this interaction with the disciples. He's had this out and out with Peter. He calls all the crowd together and he goes, look, this is how it's going to go down. This is what this kingdom thing is all about. You got to make a choice. If you're going to follow me, you have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross. You have to follow me. Like, we pick 2 out of 3. He's like, this is all in here. This is the discipleship part that most people skip over, right? Because we hear salvation is free, and we're like, I'm in. Salvation is free. It's bought. It's paid for. I'm on that plan. And that's the good news, man. That plan stands firm. That plan is in place because of what Jesus did on the cross. And Jesus says, but I call you to be a disciple. It's more than just fire insurance. It's lifestyle. It's major change. You've got to deny yourself as you come after me. You have to take up your cross, and you have to follow me. Death is not just for Jesus. Death is for every one of his disciples. We're like, I don't think I like that plan. Not our plan, God's plan. Not my immediate fix, God's progressive and ongoing journey with his Son. So if I give myself to Jesus wholly, once and for all, I'm good to go. Let me know how that goes, because I would love to have that plan, right? But it's more of a give myself to Jesus daily. It's more of a take up my cross daily. It's more come after Jesus daily. It's more follow Jesus daily. But we want the immediate fix. We don't want the process. So Jesus goes, look, this is a walk. This is a relationship. This is a day in and day out, hour in and hour out relationship as you deny yourself, come after me, take up your cross, and follow me. This is the way I choose you to go, to identify with me in all that you do. Not identify with me on Sundays and then go have a good week. Not identify with me at church, but do whatever you do at workplace. Not here and there, but come after me daily in all that you do as you deny yourself. Because what's self do, man? Self is self-protective. I'm going to protect myself, and I'm going to make sure that I fly under the radar, and it's all going to be good. And Jesus says, now I want to elevate you up as you come after me and follow me, to shine for me and to do what only you can do in the places that only you go, to accomplish what only I've called you to do. And in that, that's the losing of ourselves. That's the, I don't really want to do that, but I do want to be in God's plan. I don't want to be in my plan, because none of those sound really good long term. But this really seems hard. This almost seems impossible. And Jesus goes, yeah, with man, it's impossible. With God, all things are possible. As you deny yourself daily and take up your cross and follow me. But our culture rails against that, right? Our culture is, it's on you, it's your identity, it's your deal, it's your individuality, all these great Western words we come up with to self-promote and self-enlighten. And God says the exact opposite. I'm asking you to lose yourself. And we're like, well, that's not what I've been taught for 40 years. We're like, I know. That's why it's a process. That's why we've got to oppose what the culture says. Because the culture said when the Messiah comes, he's going to set up a kingdom, he's going to kick out Rome, he's going to establish his cabinet, and you guys are going to rule and reign forever. They just missed the in-between part. That the suffering servant had to come before the Messiah claims his kingdom. And we, like Peter, say, can't we just skip over that? And Jesus could have, right? He could have. He could have done the miracle from heaven. He could have done whatever he wanted to set up his kingdom. But he chose God's plan, not his own individual plan. And so God goes, okay, let's go your scenario. Let's say you do the individual thing. You do your self-promotion. You do pull yourself up by the bootstraps and make your best of yourself. And you do it your way. And you gain the entire world. Man, you arrive. And at the end of all that, probably around retirement age maybe, if we make it that long, we look back and we're like, duh, what was I doing? He's like, you're going to lose so much if you go with your plan. So I love you enough to tell you up front, do not do that. Do not come up with your plan and dig in and just put your head down and get to the goal that you've set so that you can go, made it, and then look back and said, lost it. Listen to my heart and hear that I've got a way better way. That I'm not saying you got to lose it all, but I might ask you to. We ain't got time for that. All right, maybe a little. Fear-based performance, right? Got to make it. Got to make it while I'm young. Why? Because my dad got laid off at 55, and he had a hard time after that. So I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to dig in. I'm going to self-promote. I'm going to do it humbly. I'm going to do it with hidden pride, not open pride, so nobody knows I'm prideful. And I'm going to get the promotions, and I'm going to get the next paycheck, and I'm going to get the next title, and I'm going to arrive. And it didn't seem like a bad thing until God says, I got a different plan. And then I was like, oh, no, we don't. You know how hard I worked to get here? We're not redoing this plan. That's when the trouble hit. Now, loving, gracious God was patient because he could have just wiped the whole thing out, right? You done. You're fired. You out. But he didn't. He walked me through the process. The crazy part is everything that I invested to arrive so that when I was 55 and they laid me off, I'm like, that's fine. I'm good. We lost. And we didn't lose because bad financial advisor. We lost because of my pride. Because I got this, God. I'm good. And the crazy part about me, I'm so bullheaded, I didn't lose it once. I lost it twice. We did all tech until tech died. Then we did all the other until that died. And then we looked up going, okay, that was fun. Sorry I made you work those extra couple years to get vested because I just lost it all in the stock market. But it was a fun ride. God goes, we could have done that way different, guys. Yep. You want to gain the world? Have at it. But you're going to lose something in the process. Well, thank God it was a stock market and not my kids. We'll leave it at that. You can gain everything the world has, but you don't gain freedom. And somewhere along the line, you're going to lose it. But if we humble ourselves and say, God, I want your world. I want your plan. I want your way. He's like, dude, it's going to include suffering. And you don't want the suffering, but you got to share. Discipleship equals suffering. Because it's contrary to our culture. It's contrary to the Western ways. It's contrary to every logical thought process. It's contrary to even my brain. But I know it's the way he's called us to go. So he says, lose yourself. And at the end, you'll gain everything. So I got to throw this little asterisk in at the end. If Jesus is the means to our end, we're not following Jesus. You're like, please elaborate, right? If I'm following Jesus to get to a pre-described end that I've determined, you're not really following Jesus. I'm not really following Jesus. Jesus has got to be the end to our following. It's not a means to the end. It's not, I'm going to do this Jesus thing because I'm going to use him to get here, and then everything will be good. That is seriously not following Jesus. That's following some pre-described thing that you've come up with, and you're just tagging Jesus to the end of it going, bless it. Jesus' discipleship is a call to say, Jesus is my all. He is my means, and he is my end. And we're going to waffle back and forth on that. And that's why we need each other. Because when I start using Jesus for a means to the end, I need a brother to come alongside of me and going, what's your motive here? Where are you going with this? Is he all, or is he a way to get to the all? Because a lot of times when we use Jesus as a means to an end, we try to sidestep suffering. Like, I'm going to do it Jesus' way, right? Until I get to that, and then I'm going to go around this way. And we'll get to the end, and it'll all be okay. And Jesus is like, no, the only way it's good is if you walk through all that I have for you. So our plan, to avoid the suffering. Can I get an amen? Man, we do everything to avoid suffering. We have visions and plans to forego suffering. But God's plan, again, demands that we follow Jesus anywhere. You're like, are you guaranteeing suffering? No. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that skate through and they're like, man, I really didn't have to go through that to get there. Man, thank the Lord. Praise him for that. But for the most of us, that path somewhere leads through suffering. That's where the refinement comes. That's where the hardship comes. That's where the digging in comes. And God's plans demands that we follow Jesus wherever, even if it's through the suffering. So Jesus is taking these guys to a place they'd never been before, right? He's got masses of people following. He has been proclaimed to be the Messiah. He's like, shh, don't tell anybody. Then he calls the crowd and he's like, you want to know what true discipleship is? It means dying to yourself, losing yourself, so that you can gain everything. And from now on, everything that Jesus teaches is going to point to Jerusalem. It's going to point to the cross. It's going to point to his death, his suffering, his resurrection. And so many times they heard part of that, but like Peter, they forgot the resurrection part. And even us today, we could be like, oh my gosh, this is the craziest thing. I can't believe God's going to take me through this. And he's like, you forgot the last part, the best part, the most important part. 3 days later, Jesus rose himself from the dead. 3 days later, he's going to bring us into resurrection power. 3 days later, he's going to get us through the suffering and get us to where we need to be. And we're going to celebrate that. And we're going to look back and go, man, I hope I never have to go through that again. But I'm so glad God got me through that, because now I'm the person that's way different before the suffering. And then we say, God, we're not going to do that again, right? He's like, well, maybe not today. But Jesus is the king. But he had to go through the cross. And his disciples, Jesus goes, look, you're my co-heirs. You're like little kings and little queens, little princes and princesses. The crown is coming. But you got to deny this whole thing that you think is the reality and focus on the true reality, the eternal kingdom that's been set up for each one of us. So the crazy thing about discipleship is it's a call. And just like a phone call, we either send it to voicemail, or we turn it off and silence it, or we answer the call. There's probably a couple others we do, like block. Don't block. So let's put that one on the side. Most of the times we silence it like, oh, I know this is truth, but I don't want to really hear this today. I was hoping for a really good feel-good so we could go get some lunch. Jesus goes, this is the most important aspect of what I'm asking mankind to do. Take up the cross, which is not some thorn in your side. It's take up the gospel of Jesus Christ and make it your own. To let Jesus write that on your heart. Sealed, signed, delivered, taken care of, paid for in full. It's all good. Because I did it all, and the third day I rose myself from the dead. And then answer the call to discipleship, because it's not a, I'm done, it's a finish line. That call to salvation is a start line. It's a start line to the best race you're ever going to run. But it involves getting off our track and onto God's race course. Who cut in on you? Got you off track? Do you have time? God goes, this is a devotion and a call that's got to be taken seriously. And we're not going to get there by following our plan. Look, man, this was a message from me. Y'all get to just listen in on it. Our plan asks for signs. God's plan demands faith. Our plan looks at the physical. God's plan demands us look beyond to the spiritual. Our plan wants an immediate fix. God's plan is many times progressive. Our plan questions that Jesus is the only way. Man, I got a good story for that one. God's plan demands that we come to God through Jesus. Our plan wants Jesus to do it our way. God's plan demands that we follow his Son. Our plan wants to avoid suffering, but God's plan demands that we follow Jesus anywhere. Let's pray.